So, okay. So, welcome, guys. This is Master the Intro. For everyone that doesn't know me, I'm Sasha Morel. I compete from Plano, Texas. I go to Plano Senior High School. I'm a lecturer here for EIF. I also write articles, and I'm a national. I broke at nationals, Texas semifinalist. I'm a decent extemper, and I've worked a lot with the other people here at EIF. So they trusted me to do this lecture, and I'm really happy that you guys are here to hear it. Um, so first of all, just like also, I really recommend taking notes. I know it's like weird to ask you guys to take notes when you're not in school, but like even if it's like little things you hear that you want to keep on to, it works really well in my opinion to just like store that information. Um, but honestly, guys, welcome. Uh, for me, questions, you can literally just turn on your mic. I don't really care. I'll like always get to your question no matter what it is, even if it's like not like pertinent to what's exactly on the screen. But first of all, this is the table of contents, right? This is what we're gonna go through, like basically, right? We're gonna go through the goal of the intro, then we're gonna get to the structure, right? How should an intro look? And then third, like the tricks. What things can I do while prepping the intro to make it easier? Because like the intro is the most important, but also I think the hardest part to prep. And so when you like get little tricks, you'll get a lot better. And then fourth, we're gonna like practice, right? Just doing some little drills or like just showing y'all how you guys can get better. Um, so why do we care so much about the intro? The thing that like people sometimes don't always click with is that you could be giving like a final speech to like 60 people or giving a speech alone, but that judge in the back of the room is the most important person. And so like you walk into the room, you like tell the judge who you are, but as soon as you start speaking, you give your judge gives you their full attention, right? And so this is where we win or lose the judge. Because if for the first minute of like the speech, you're sitting there and you're giving like an okay intro, your judge may be listening, but they're not actively listening. They're not sitting there and caring about what you have to say. And so by having a really solid intro, we get the judge to care and listen to the whole speech. But even like more importantly, it establishes connection. If you get your judge to laugh, smile, feel, care about your intro, they're gonna rank you higher. Like simply put, if you and like six other people get into a room and you all give an okay speech, but your intro was superb and your judge feels connected to you as a person, you're gonna rank higher. And like I get you should be focused on giving the best speech possible, but it is like a game, right? It is a competition, and those little things do add up. The same thing, right? The first minute and 30 seconds of your speech is the most impactful part of it, except maybe like, a couple like key buzzwords throughout your speech. But like as an extemper, and this is different from your oratory where your heart story is going to be the most important, or like an info when you get to like the real life utilization and the impact of your thing, those come later in the speech. But as an extemper, it's really the intro that like connects with your audience. So now we're gonna go over structure, right? I think this is the biggest thing that novices and beginners tend to struggle with because this is the thing that like is the most daunting, right? How do I take the most important part of my speech and make it really simple? So this is how like you would flow it on your like legal pad or wherever you prep on. It's your AGD, then your link, then your background, your statement of significance or like SIG statement or SOS, your question, and then your answer. If you can put like little things in the side of your page that look like that, I promise you it will make it 100 times easier. Um, I do recommend that when you're prepping, put 4 or 5 lines for the background. I know it seems excessive, but like if you really flesh out your background and it's really well prepped, your judge is going to be very impressed. And once again, it builds that ethos, right? This kid knows what he's talking about. I'm going to keep listening. Um, hey, Natalie, I know you're coming in a little bit late. No, not a big deal at all. The first part of this, like you didn't miss much, but the first part's going to be on YouTube. So you're all good. First part is the AGD, right? The most important, or I guess not the most important, but the first thing your judge hears, right? If you're stuttering on your AGD, it's gonna kind of come off bad. So here's a couple things that I really recommend for absolutely everyone when you're like preparing, right? Or giving your AGD. First, be topical, right? If you pull a question about, let's say, Donald Trump's indictment, and you give an awesome joke, and like the whole room is laughing, but it's not about Donald Trump or doesn't connect to Donald Trump, it doesn't really work in your favor, right? Because the judge laughs, but then you go into your link in your background, and then your judge is like, what is this kid talking about? Like, it's a change of pace. And the judge kind of feels left behind, right? So being topical really helps. And like, especially for like extempers, a lot of extempers, I know like figuring out jokes or like intros that you can use that fits is probably the most difficult part and like drains time. But even if it's something as simple as looking up a story, right? You have a speech on housing. I recently had a speech about like how can we improve urban housing, like urban housing projects. And I couldn't really figure out anything that I could captivate my audience with. So I took a real life story of a person who got kicked out of his house, couldn't find like a government housing project, and ended up dying on the streets because of hypothermia. That's the word. Um, and like it's a terrible thing, but it's a true human story, and humans connect to humans, right? So whether they're laughing at your joke or laughing at a story, right? They're always going to be connected. So um, that's kind of what I was going to get into here. Um, choose pathos, I guess is what I put. You want your judge to feel connected to you as a person. You want them to laugh. Laughing creates like a huge bond between you and your judge. And if you give a joke, smile. Like I can't tell you like how much your judge wants to like how much more your judge wants to smile when you smile, right? And then my third thing was like choose a route, right? You can do a joke or a funny quote. Like if you have canned AGDs that are funny, use them. A lot of people think canning's bad, but I just think it's a way that good extempers get even better. Or like a heart story, right? Like I told you about the man who died of hypothermia. It's a real human story, and your judge is going to feel connected to that. And so prep and here's the thing that I didn't put on the slides. I think you should prep your AGD last. It's the first thing that we go over, and it's the first thing on your sheet. Like you're done with everything, and now let's think. Here's a story that fits with my speech, or here's a joke that will lead really into my background. Your background's super important. So like if it doesn't like if your AGD, you should fit your AGD to your background, not your background to the AGD. That's what I'm saying. Any questions before we move on? All right, perfect. Next is your link, right? This is really, really simple. It's just the one sentence between your AGD and your background that connects, right? If you have a joke about Donald Trump, and but you can be, and then you have a question that relates back, right? I don't know, like off the top of my head, or let's say you have a joke about Congress, and then your link would be, but Congress's ineffectiveness isn't just in the joke world. It happens in the real world, and it affects people like us, right? It kind of gets you back into the background, and you by using like powerful words and what I call judge brownie points, using words like me, you, us, and we, once again keeps connecting you to the judge, right? It's saying, but this is funny and all, but like this is real, and you need to care. And so, really quick sentence, just connecting your AGD back to your background. The background. I think this is probably the most daunting part for most extempers, right? Because you're sitting there and you're wondering, how do I condense 2,000 years plus of human history, all leading up to this one specific moment, and my judge needs to understand? Um, it's really not that big, but like you might have a wide, broad topic that has an incomprehensibly long history. Um, so here's a one strategy that I use, right? First of all, 1 to 2 sources. I've seen people use 3 or 4 sources, and that's like overload. At that point, your judge doesn't care, and it feels like you're reading a policy case, which, in all honesty, I would probably like never want to do that. Like, people judge IEs for a reason; they want to be entertained. Um, but also, here's the things that you need to really explain, right? Don't worry so much about being over encompassing rather than explaining who the actors are, what is like I say legislation, but like what is like at play, right? As a DXer, I'm always thinking like policies that could be passed, but like, it could really be like anything that's at play. What could happen? And then the history, right? If it's really pertinent. Let's say you get a question about the Russia-Ukraine war. The history would be like, but for the past 2 years, both countries have been quarreling to no effect. Or rather, all this other stuff, right? That one question, that one little sentence takes care of the history. Then, like, your significant actors, right? You have a Russia Ukraine question. You want to explain who Russia and Ukraine is in this situation, even if people already know. Like, everyone knows what Russia and Ukraine are doing, but by getting there, you're once again showing your judge that you're knowledgeable. And then for your background, I guess the biggest thing that I would always tackle is like, why are we asking the question, right? Um, Now that like in the first, I guess like half of your background, you've explained who the people are, what is happening, then you have to be, why are we asking the question, right? Because every question is like written for a reason, and it's because like people are being affected. So I guess my strategy, right? Your second half of your background is more like, what is the human impact of this problem? What is like you get a Russia Ukraine question. You might not want to continue rambling about Putin, but maybe ramble about, or not ramble, but like you want to talk about how oil prices are affecting Americans like us. Because, the war is inflating oil prices, and that's making it harder for everyone to live their normal lives. Things like that, once again, really attract your judge. Like, I'm going to keep harping back to the whole like get your judge's attention thing, but your judge is the one person in the room that affects whether you go to the next round or not. And like for them to feel important in your speech is for them to give, like, to actually start caring about you. So once again, tie it back to the human aspect. So your background, right? It's going to be about, I'd say, 45 seconds long. Your first half is really just like, who are the significant actors? What is the history of this? And then what is the human impact? What happens to people, right? And here's the thing that I noticed like not all circuits do, but you'll see a really good example in the video we're gonna watch. Really popular here in Texas. It's the statement of significance, right? At the end of your background, this is your power line. And you know, for DX, I would relate it to the judge because your judge probably lives in America. And for like IXers, I would say related to the world, right? How many people, what are the billions of people that could be affected? Or what are like, you know, what is the scope of this situation? And like my favorite way to do it is just, but it's when considering, like for an example, right? If you gave me a question about, um, I'm blanking here, could Congress pass gun control laws in the next? Actually, that's. I'll just show you guys the video. But like, if you have a really good question, like I don't know, for example, yeah, Adi, what's up?
So to flow from AGD to background, we have the link. So how do you connect the SOS to the background?
All right, so let's pretend that I got a question like, how can the United States increase its domestic supply of oil? And my background is like, you know, oil, like back end of my background, and I'm like, but the Washington Post explains 3 days ago that Americans who are suffering from oil prices often have to leave out necessities just to be able to get to their cars, to get to work. With how oil prices are rising in the United States, that same article tells us that more and more people are having to suffer and put things off the table. But it's when considering that no parent should ever have to leave food off the table for their children just to get to work. Like that could be it, right? Or it could be something along the lines of, but it's when considering that gas prices for people like you and me could double in the next year, right? It's like that kind of thing, right? You're kind of recapping what your background is saying. You're kind of like putting it close to that and saying, but here is why you care. And then how I do it is like, but it's when considering that gas prices could double in the next year that we must ask today's question. Or it could be like that it becomes critical to answer today's question, right? Um, and then the question and your answer, if you guys like have any like problems with like how you're doing that, obviously you can like ask right now. But I feel like since you guys all seem to be pretty like well versed in like long-term extempers, you guys understand how to like prepare the rest of your speech. So all this, right? It's like AGD, link, background, statement of significance. That's the biggest, those are like the biggest emotional drivers for your judge. That's where your judge is like hooked to you, connected, and is like, I love this kid. And I want to give him the one, even though his speech is okay, because as a human, I love who he is. Um, and so I think I'm gonna show you like my favorite intro that I've ever seen. I'll admit the intro isn't perfect because his timing's off. He spends a crazy amount of time on his AGD, but it pays off in my opinion, and you'll see why. The moment that Peter here starts speaking is the moment you say, "This kid knows his stuff. I like where his head is at, and I want to see him win." Just because he shows you why you as a judge or as a person care about the topic. And also a great example of the heart story that I was talking about earlier. So I'm just gonna let the intro play. This is from the 2022 like NSDA final round. This guy is amazing. I think he ended up winning the final round too. So big congrats to him. Let's get to watching.
Speaker number 2.
I'll end up pausing throughout to show you like what I'm
4553,
trying to point out.
Answering the question, will gun reform stand a chance in the United States' Congress?
Just 9 days ago, 11-year-old Mia Sorillo testified in front of the United States Congress, pleading with our nation's elected leaders for comprehensive gun reform. But just a few weeks earlier, Mia survived a horrific school shooting in Uvalde, Texas, that saw 19 of her classmates and 2 of her teachers killed at the hands of an 18-year-old gunman. Mia survived by covering herself in the blood of her fallen classmates in order to trick the shooter. No child should have to go through that. But it may have finally.
All right. So that was his AGD. It was really long, but I think now that you saw that, you probably are going to get the point, right? This is a story of a real life human who exists on the same planet as you, probably like just within a couple hours of where you live, right? And they went through that. And like, there's not a single person in that massive room. And I tell you, that room is massive. That wasn't sitting there and saying, holy crap. And so I think that's what your AGD has to do, right? Your AGD has to be either a heart story that grips everyone's attention and is like, they're like heartbound, right? Or it's a joke that's going to capture everyone's attention and be like, this was really funny. I like this kid. So I think that's kind of where your AGD needs to be at. It doesn't have to be super. Yeah, Adi.
So you mentioned how the AGD is one of the most important parts of the speech and also how Peter's was very long. So when you're actually prepping a speech, you only have around 30 minutes. So how much of that 30 minutes should you be spending on the AGD alone?
So like everyone has a different prep split. I'll usually spend about 13 minutes writing my speech and 17 minutes rehearsing. But I know kids, actually one of them used to like be really involved in equality and forensics. His name is Teddy Gherkin, who had like a 6-minute prep split and like 24 minutes of prep. So it really depends for everyone. But what I would suggest is make it the last thing you prep, right? You've prepped out your entire speech, you know what you're going to say in your background, and then go find your intro, right? For Peter here, right? You'll see what the rest of his background's about, but it ties in perfectly with Mia Sorillo. And I could bet you like $1,000 that Peter found out what he wanted to say and then found a story that perfectly matched. So I would just say don't worry about spending like too much time prepping, like the AGD. Just whenever you're done with everything, find something that works. And like let's say you really can't find anything, like look up a story or just like honestly, as you're giving the speech, rehearsing, ideas will come to mind for transitions, for maybe even your AGD. But that's how I would tackle it. All right. let's
Okay,
keep
on a
going.
related note,
Yeah.
sometimes it's pretty hard to find AGDs under time pressure. So do you do anything outside of a tournament to try to find good AGDs?
Yeah, you can AGDs for sure, right? Some examples will have AGDs that they can use for multiple questions, multiple topics, right? I have a couple. I'm not huge on canning AGDs because for me, I think the stories are much more impactful, but at least just for me, right, as like my type of speaker. But you can go and like find jokes, right? One of my teammates last year, her name's Lindsay. Shout out Lindsay. She had this really funny joke about how Boris Johnson is destroying the water supply because he needs to wash his hair so often, right? And not only did she use it for all of her like Great Britain IX questions, but she could use it for things like water related questions, right? Even though water scarcity is such like an important topic, that AGD fit really well. And so like writing jokes on the side can be like really versatile, or just like having like an intro. There's a really good extemper from like my circuit who has an intro about how like Congress is like basically a zoo, and then he like points out how like specific congressmen look like animals, and like he like it's a really like flowy awesome intro, and he uses it for like almost all of his like US Congress speeches. So like writing little jokes like those can come really handy. Obviously, you can't like have like a sheet that has the jokes on them in prep, because like that's like an evidence violation. But like if they're in the back of your head, you can obviously use them. I've never had anyone complain about a canned intro. So can your intros. I feel like I just rambled on way too much. But like finding jokes out of your own time, writing them down somewhere, and then remembering them in prep. If that's what you struggle with. All right. So now we're gonna go into his link, and you're gonna see it's one sentence, but it perfectly switches the mood, and it perfectly switches to like the meat of his background.
Convinced Congress to talk about gun reform.
Right, oh,
Speaker number
I want you to like really hear exactly how he does it.
And 2 of her teachers killed at the hands of an 18-year-old gunman. Mia survived by covering herself in the blood of her fallen classmates in order to trick the shooter. No child should have to go through that. But it may have finally convinced Congress to talk about gun reform.
But it may have finally convinced Congress to talk about gun reform, right? He didn't mention Congress a single time in his AGD. And that is the topic of his question, right? It's Congress. But you see how that one line, but it may have convinced Congress. It switches from the tone, it's the same like tone overall, but it like perfectly transitions to his background. That's all a link really is.
An article from US News, published 2 days ago, explains that the House recently passed a comprehensive piece of gun reform legislation. Now, it's in purgatory, awaiting a vote in the Senate. But this is a situation.
Oh my goodness. And so you see there, right? That's a really good example of the history. Like I was talking about the first part of your background, history, significant actors, right? He kind of already clarifies about Congress, but then he talks about the history, right? We do have a piece of gun reform in the works, but it's in purgatory or waiting for the Senate. So it mentions the Senate, which is like a particularly important actor, mentions exactly what the history of the topic is. And then now we're going to get to the really important part, which is relating it back to the people.
No child should have to go through that. But it may have finally convinced Congress to talk about gun reform. An article from US News, published 2 days ago, explains that the House recently passed a comprehensive piece of gun reform legislation. Now, it's in purgatory, awaiting a vote in the Senate. But this is a situation that Americans find all too familiar. Because
that Americans find all too familiar. Your judge is an American, and that immediately calls to their attention, right? So saying words like me, you, us, Americans kind of like creates that connection again.
Last time federal level gun control legislation was passed was 1994. We can't afford to wait another 30 years.
It's again more history, but it tells you exactly how important it is for people, right? For Americans because they can't wait any longer.
Considering that according to data from the Brady Center for Preventing Gun Violence this year, in just the time it takes me to finish this speech, one American will die from gun violence. Oh,
But like, boom, right? Like, that's the statement of significance, and that's how important it is, right? But it's when considering that in the time it took me to write this speech, one person will die of gun control. And then everyone is sitting here looking and saying, every 7 minutes, a person dies from gun control. And like, I promise you, every person in that room did that. Like, your statement of significance is now putting it into perspective, right? Whether it's doubling the price of gas, the fact that mothers won't be able to feed their children, the fact that people will die because nothing's being done, it tells your judge not only that this is a real issue, which you did in your background, but this is super important for everyone. And so that's what your like SIG statement is really going for here. I think out of everything that I've shown you today, he does a perfect job and nails all four of those parts. He tells you, he gives you like a story that captivates your heart, turns it really well into like a Congress issue, perfectly explains where we're at in Congress and who the people are, and then tells you exactly why you care. So if you can do those four things in your intro, you have it perfectly prepped out. And from now on, I think what you guys can do is just like focus on those four main parts, make sure they all link, and giving your intro so much smoother now. Because for a lot of novices, you're there, and for a minute and 30 seconds, you're just rambling about your topic and like introducing it. But when you like segment it out, everything is so much more clear and more conscious to you, and it comes out really clear, conscious, and connected for your judge. So now let's move on to the third part of this whole lecture presentation. Prep tricks, right? How do you make a really good intro in probably only 2 or 3 minutes of your time? Like realistically, most of your prep time in like your draw room is going to be spent on analysis and giving you really good speeches, like analysis wise. And so a lot of times people like kind of forget about how to do the intro. And so 2 things I'll tell you right now is to prep the intro last. Once again, your intro needs to go transition seamlessly into your points, right? So if you prep your intro before your points, it's not gonna like be as smooth. It's not gonna fit as well. And then the second thing is to not take AGD risks, right? I get it. Giving a really funny AGD is like amazing, right? But if your AGD is going to be a bit controversial, it will down you. A decent AGD will make you competitive in a round, but one that crosses a line is going to get you the 6. That's what happened to me at TFA State this year. I was in semifinals. My speech was good, but the joke I shut it off with was like just not super, appropriate for like the situation we were in. It was about Elon Musk and his children, and now he has way too many children. But giving a joke that is like out of pocket, inappropriate will get you docked. And like I just don't want you guys to end up doing that, even though it might be really funny. Another great like prep trick, it comes to sourcing, right? When you're looking for sources, you don't need to be super like big on like research, but like let's say you're Peter Woliski in that 2022 final round and you have to think, okay, can US like what is the history of US gun control reform? I really can't type today. This is why I spend so much time in prep, because I can't type, right? And then a timeline of major gun control laws. And you have all of this, right? And then you can say, even though this like 1994 was the last one, right? You can say 2008, right? And ever since 2008, this has been the standard but Congress has done nothing to change it, even though in 14 years we've had all of this happen, right? I think I think you gotta prep your background mentally even before you go find your sources, right? So don't worry too much about researching your background. Kind of just think, right? Okay, here's exactly what I need to say for this speech, right? And I'm gonna find a source that just says that. Honestly, that's all you're really doing. Yeah, Adi.
So when I make an AGD, oftentimes I'm like bashing on a certain politician. So would you say that that's this AGD risk?
No, because there's a difference between punching up and punching down, right? Punching down would be like making fun of community that's suffering or like saying a joke that just isn't like appropriate. But punching up is like, hey, there's this person who's president right now, and he does this, and this is funny, right? Like bashing on Biden or Trump or Putin or Modi or Macron or whoever it is. These are people in power who have exponentially more power than we do. And so it's almost like throwing a rock at like a big castle, like nothing's gonna happen, right? And your judge probably knows and feels the same way. Even if they are like a diehard Trump supporter, right? And you make a joke about Trump's hair, they're gonna chuckle because like it's this person they see on TV, not a person that they relate to. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
But also, I will say this, competing in Texas, you do have to read the room sometimes. If you can tell by your judge's paradigm or how they're like acting that they may be, super conservative or maybe super liberal, right? I would never suggest changing your AGD on the spot. But if you have like little jokes like seeded throughout your speech about, certain politicians that they may be super fond of, maybe just remove those. I'd say keep the AGD because it's like really important. But like when it comes to little jokes, if you can tell your judge like doesn't really like that, then like you can like remove those. I don't know why it says 3 columns, but this is more like this is more for like presentation wise of your intro. Um, first one's like use your face. I've seen so many extempers who are genuinely super talented, but lose the judge because they don't convey what they're saying, right? If you're saying a joke, smile. If you're giving a sad story, give yourself a concerned face. Public speaking is like 30% of your words and like 70% of like how you present those words. So like smiling is super powerful and smiling is contagious. So like if you do smile with a joke, your judge will probably smile. Use your hands, right? A good rule of thumb that one of my favorite coaches, Neil White, shout out Mr. White. Don't use hand signals on your first sentence. Use them well and use them sparingly, right? Like I'm gonna back out. Like if your hands are always like this shaking, your judge stops focusing on your hands. And actually like it detracts from your face. But if your hands are at your side and you do something like this when you're saying something super important or going something like this, your judge sees that you're emphasizing those words. So use your face, use your hands, and like be interesting. That's my last one. And it sounds like really like off for me to say that, but like if information isn't necessary, cut it out of your intro. Because like it takes 1 or 2 bad sentences for your judge to like shut their brain off. Because it's like 8 in the morning and they had to wake their kid up to get here, or they're a coach who like has been driving in a bus for like 2 days. Like your judge isn't going to be mentally on the same like hype wavelength that you are. So if you're like throwing out information that isn't necessary, they're gonna lose. You're gonna lose them. And finally, we're actually running pretty well on time here, but practicing at home. And these are 4 drills that I do like religiously, and I think made me a really, really good extemper. The AGD drill. This is one that I did with like my former teammate Lindsay, and like it was just a really fun game to play. And like I know we have like two teammates in this call, so you guys could definitely like coordinate with each other. But like literally um find like something random. Like you're on the bus and you see like a really bad billboard and say, "Hey, make an intro about this billboard that connects to Donald Trump." Or say like connect penguins to, I don't know, Joe Biden. Like something super stupid. But I promise you, by being able to relate two completely random things really well over time and practicing, you're going to be able to connect two similar things really well. It makes you like a lot more creative with your AGDs, helps you with your wordplay. If you're struggling to find out the specific wording, just toying around with like random AGDs over time will like give you like better, I guess, like fluency, like not really fluency, but like fluidity when you speak, right? The second one that I like to do, just like giving quick backgrounds. Go on like the Equality and Forensics website and find like questions and like prep out a background for one question in 5 minutes, and then give that background. What am I saying? So like, I guess you could prep out a full intro, but like literally just the background, right? Find like the pertinent issues. Take 5 minutes of research and turn it into a good background. And then scrap the question, move on to the next one, and then prep it out in 3 minutes. And so basically what you're doing here is that you're first of all, you're building knowledge for yourself, which is huge for like when you go and compete. Researching, listening to podcasts, super huge. But most importantly, when you're like prepping your backgrounds, by being more and more comfortable with like prepping under time pressure, it's better for like in tournament prep. So like, you prep for 5 minutes, here's what you get. Prep for 3, prep for 1. Like obviously the quality is never going to be as good as when you give it more time, but you get faster and faster at prepping out your background, which I think is the most time consuming part of the intro. Third, fluency. I'm sure if you do speech and debate at your school, your coach probably made you do this in like a really embarrassing manner. Like just put a pen in your mouth and talk. Like if I can find a pen, right? And you just talk like this, it forces you to really enunciate your words, which is a really huge issue because when people like stumble over their words in an intro, your judge also loses kind of respect for you as a speaker, which is like a really bad thing. I don't think we should be as like critical as people when they stumble, but especially in your intro, if you're stumbling and that's causing like an issue with your fluency, practicing with a pen in your mouth, it just forces you to like naturally and like even like thinking about enunciating more. So morning of a tournament, do your vocal warm-ups, and then give 2 intros with a pen in your mouth. Because like that's how you get really good at being fluent. And the fourth one is just prepping out intros over and over again, like full intros, because they are shorter than giving a full speech. Like if you're at lunch and you have nothing to do, just prepping out an intro and giving it is going to literally be like 5 or 6 minutes of your time maximum. And like it's really, really good. You get a bit of research done. So just prepping, right? And let's say you have 15 minutes to prep and give speeches at practice, right? You could do 2 or 3 intros in that time rather than give a full speech. So it helps you get away from that time constraint. That's it. I know it's a really short lecture, but honestly, it's just the intro. I do want to like really open the floor for questions because I think this is like my first lecture that I've done in a while, so it's probably really I've probably missed a lot of stuff. But basically, first of all, I want to say thank you for showing up. It's people like you who come to EIF and help us run. We're completely student run, student led, student funded. So just by showing up to these, you're doing not only like good for yourself by learning, but you really help out the organization. But now questions about the intro, like really rifle them off. I'm not gonna like reject any questions.
I had a question
Yeah, go for it.
on statement of significance. So you said like we should probably like you use like when considering or like considering in order to try to like tie in from the background, right?
Mm-hmm.
So is there like any other way we can do it as well, just to like mix it up sometimes?
Yeah. Obviously, I think the biggest tip is just be like natural to yourself, right? If something like
Mhm.
doesn't click with you and it doesn't click with you like as a speaker, it's gonna show to the judge. I use when considering, and I think it's like almost become a bit of a standard here in Texas, but you could use, I mean, literally anything that kind of diverts, it kind of like wraps up, puts a bow on your background and says, but here's why you care. Um, it could be, I mean, I think but is the big word there. It could be like, but for all Americans, right? But it's when for people like us, or just something like that, just kind of
Mhm.
putting like a nice bow on, that background and then continuing with like a really important like statement of significance. So there's no right way to do it. Um, but it needs to be like natural to you.
Okay, thank you.
Right? Anything else?
Yeah, so you prep with using a prep pad on paper, right?
I use a legal pad.
So do you have it next to you? I just want to see how much you actually write for the intro.
I actually think I left it at school today because I was prepping intros. But honestly, I'm gonna take a white piece of paper and just like show you like give or take what I do, right? If you could like imagine that it's a prep pad. Right. So like I would say like this is kind of how it looks like on my paper. So I really wish I had a legal pad. This is frustrating me that I don't have one. I just went to the store and bought one like a few days ago, and then like I left it. All right, here we go. I have this notebook, and I think this will kind of show you what I do. All right, this is like about all the space I'll devote. Right, so like your AGD up here, right? Um, I write my AGD out word for word sometimes because I feel like it's important to have that really memorized, but you don't have to. And then like your link at the bottom, then your background's a couple of lines, sig statement, question, answer, and then that's like roughly what it is. Your prep pad's a bit longer, so you'll have more space under that, like get the rest of your speech done. But that's how I prep my intro. Wait, were you trying to ask like
Okay.
how much, like how many, like how much, or like what it looks like when I prep?
Yeah, like how many words do you actually have in the intro that are actually written down on the pad?
Um, I kind of write down key ideas. So like imagine like you're kind of doing like bullet points almost. So back to like if we take like Peter's speech for an example, right? I would do background, US news 2 days ago, and then one line I'd put Congress finally passes in House, still awaiting Senate, then maybe like an arrow that says haven't had gun reform since 1994, and then like the statement about how like Americans are suffering under it, right? So it's like 4 lines or maybe even 3 lines, and it's just like kind of like bullets, right? I think when you write too much down on your pad, what happens is that it kind of restricts what you get to like find while you're practicing. Because for me, when I practice, right, when I'm rehearsing that speech, I'm gonna find really awesome words, good wordplay, really flowy transition like sentences that I can use. When I like write it down all on a pad, it's really constricting. So I think it is different for everyone. I don't know a single person that preps the same way, but that's what I do. And I'll put like almost like bullet points, like statements. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
All
I have another
right.
question regarding how much time it takes to, like, how much time you dedicate to prepping an intro. So I asked you earlier about how much time you dedicate to writing the intro out, and you said that you spend around 30 minutes writing the speech and you prep the AGD last. but
Mhm.
you also spend 17 minutes like rehearsing your speech. So of those 17 minutes, how much time do you dedicate specifically to the intro?
So like I split my 30 minutes between 13 and 17. So I'd say like probably around 10 minutes is like the analysis of the speech. And then 3 minutes is my background, my sixth statement, right? Because I think that's the most important in the speech, and I really put a lot of effort into it. So probably 2 3 minutes. And then I usually make my AGD up when I'm done, and like however much time that needs, probably around a minute for me. But if you're like struggling to find AGDs, maybe try and like cut down on your prep time or can them. I don't set out time for my AGD because I feel like I guess like I've never needed to, but everyone's different, right? And let's say I spend 10 minutes on my like 3 points and I spend 3 minutes on my intro. Maybe you need 5 minutes for your intro. It's about practicing and toying around. Like the more speeches you give, the more comfortable you get with like your style. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and when you're writing the speech, you write the AGD last, but when you're rehearsing a speech, would you also do the introduction last as well?
No. When I like rehearse my speech, I just give it, right? So AGD, link, background, sixth statement, question, answer, first point, second point, third point, conclusion, right? You want to have like around 15 minutes of time rehearsing. I might have a little bit more. You might have a little bit of little bit less. That's roughly enough time for you to go speech one time, speech second time, like full speeches, and then a minute plus the time you walk to your room to nail down that intro. So that's kind of how I do it. So like most importantly, right, just like rehearsing your full speech because it's about like the fluidity and making sure you're not like speaking too much here or like not enough here. And then when I'm walking to my room, I'll really nail down that intro. Any more questions, comments, tips? Could I have done anything better with the lecture? That would really help. Perfect then. It was really awesome doing this. Teaching is like I think where I'm gonna be at in the future, and like just being able to speak to even just five of you is a really, really big thing for me. So I want to thank you guys so much for coming in. This is going to be posted on YouTube, so just like tell me right now if you'd rather like not be in it. I'll make sure your name's not shown at all. Um, but yeah, it was really, really fun. Thank you guys so much. I hope you guys have a great rest of your night.
Yep, thank you so much, Sasha.
Of
Good night.
course. Good night.